Given how many offenses we have seen fall throughout this year in NFL DFS, it is so delightful when one rises and becomes a massive surprise in a positive sense. And CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans, you have done that so far this year. A massive game on Sunday in that shootout with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we're going to break it down, recap what that means going forward for NFL DFS, outline Stroud's upside, what to do with the pass catchers, and much more to recap week 9 and take a look forward to week number 10. This is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, here to recap week number 9 in NFL DFS, recapping key usages, injuries to know, and big performances, and then take a look forward to week 10 salaries on the FanDuel main slate. We'll dive into all that here in just 1 second, but first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed right here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, because every weekday, Tom Vecchio is breaking down that day's daily NBA DFS slate, breaking down all the key players you need to know for that day here in the same feed. The Daily ISO also goes up over on FanDuel TV Plus. To get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log into your FanDuel account, or download the FanDuel TV Plus app on your Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Roku devices. You can find shows from The Ringer there. You can find Up and Adams there. Run It Back is there as well, all in the same place, along with the Heat Check, covering the spread, and the Daily ISO. So FanDuel TV Plus, the Heat Check, or the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and the FanDuel YouTube page for these NFL shows every week. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 money line bet, any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only, $5 pregame moneyline wager required, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's start things off here with our headliner from week number 9. What else could it be other than CJ Stroud's eruption on Sunday? You know the baseline stats: 470 yards, 5 touchdowns, and that's upside for DFS. But the underlying numbers are also fantastic for Stroud. He averaged 0.60 passing net expected points per dropback on Sunday. NEP is numberFire's expected points metric. League average around 0.1 usually, but Stroud is at 0.23 for the full season across all games they've played so far. If you look at EPH per dropback per next-gen stats, Stroud ranks 6th in the league in that metric, behind, guys like Patrick Mahomes, Tua, all these like stud quarterbacks, and then Stroud ranks 6th there. Now, that's all fantastic, and we love that for DFS. We want more relevant quarterbacks and good offenses. The one downside is it's kind of hard to tell which of his pass catchers will go off in a given week. Now, this week it was 3 guys because there's plenty to go around. Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz both had 11 targets in the game. Noah Brown, big day for him despite just 6 targets. Nico Collins had 5. Stroud has been lethal on deep balls so far this year, and Dell got 5 of those on Sunday, and he gets rush attempts too. So I like the profile of Tank Dell a lot. I think I still prefer Collins by a hair, but it is getting a lot closer. And I don't know how Robert Woods' eventual return would impact Schultz and Brown as kind of like the more secondary pieces here. So Stroud, worth our attention to DFS. We can say that definitively. We just got to figure out how to stack him. But I think it's worth that headache because of how good this offense can be. This guy rules, his team rules, and next week they get the Bengals. And that's probably going to be one of the best games on the main slate. So I did want to take a look at some salaries here for the Texans in week number 10 over at FanDuel. Again, the way we do this is I'll throw out a salary I think is appropriate for a player, and if the salary on FanDuel is higher, they may be a bit over salary. If it's lower, then probably going to be a good value for next week. Now, don't know what the overall quarterback slate next week looks like. There's no Tua, obviously, no Mahomes, no Hurts. So I'm guessing quarterback stars will get jacked up. But I think that Stroud is probably worth around like $7,700, up from $7,000 this past week. And his salary is $77 on the button. So I think that's very fair, given what he showed, given how fun that game can be. It's not just this one game for Stroud. I think he's pretty fun. So CJ Stroud, $7,700 fully in play for next week. Pass catchers, I would probably put Nico Collins around 66, a guy who can't have huge games. We know he can, but it's not the most consistent. He is 69. Okay, fair enough. And I'd probably put Tank Dell around 63. So the gap between Collins and Dell, not huge. And they're honestly kind of similar, where they have huge ceilings, not the best floors, and Dell's salary is 64. So pretty good across the board for all three of those guys. You want to see where Dalton Schultz is too. 61 for him, probably a little bit on the high side for my liking, but overall, really into the Texans. Really like that game next week and excited to get to talk about that. I have not checked weather for that game yet. I hope that the wind is low though, because I want to feel good stacking that game. Let's take a look at some key injuries across week number 9 now. Jaron Hall left with a concussion early for the Vikings, led to a Joshua Dobbs debut for the Vikings, and he had some great runs. He was not super efficient, but that's pretty understandable given the circumstances. They were going through the cadence on the sideline, stuff like that during the game, which is absurd. And seeing Dobbs play well overall does have to up your confidence in this offense. I was pretty down on them with Cousins going down, but I think this does boost them, and that's a good thing because they've got pretty concentrated usages on this team, and they will going forward too, because Cam Akers feared to have suffered a torn Achilles. That's just a big bummer for him given what he's gone through. So you hope that's not the case, but that stakes. KJ Osborne left with concussion. TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison combined for 19 targets Sunday. Hawkinson in the games without Justin Jefferson has a 29% target share. Addison is at 21%. It's not like it's not a lock that Jefferson is back this week when he is eligible to come off of IR. And those target shares, Hawkinson 29, Addison 21, could both increase if Osborne can't go. As for the backfield, Alexander Mattison, 56% snap rates. He had a long reception, but overall, it had seemed like the role was trending down for Mattison. I don't know if they trust Ty Chandler enough to get him more involved. He looks good when he touches the ball, but there's probably a reason they don't give him the ball as much. So Mattison does get bumped up, but I think he's still pretty flawed. I'll want to be pretty cautious with him if he's tracking to be popular next week. They get New Orleans, so decently tough defense. I do want to check on the salaries here, both for Hawkinson and for Mattison. Let's do Hawkinson first. He's more fun. I'm more likely to be on him, I think. I would say 29% target share at tight end, not the biggest upside offense, not the best quarterback. That's probably worth around $6,800 for Hawkinson. He's 66. That's not bad. So I think Hawkinson might be a guy we could potentially turn to for next week. As for Mattison, I know, again, no Akers, which means he should have a good chunk of this backfield, but not very efficient. I think he's kind of like in the Rachaad White mold in that regard. We'll talk about White later on. He's actually trending up, but I would say he's probably around 68 or so, and he's 62. So with Akers being out, Mattison 62 is probably going to be a guy we have to take a look at. I would like to be able to avoid him. That'd be the goal for me, but that's a low enough salary where we'll have to consider Alexander Mattison for sure. Dallas Goedert could wind up on IR after breaking his forearm in Sunday's game for the Eagles. The target tree is already pretty narrow for them, but it could be even more so now. If we look back to last year, there was a 5-game stretch where Goddard didn't play. They had A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith healthy, and in those 5 games, Devontae Smith's target share was 27.5%. A.J. Brown was 29.4%. Quez Watkins also had a 15.6% target share. So that means there could be room for someone like Olamide Zaccheaus or Julio Jones to get in some more work as well. But I think the big takeaway here is bumping up Devontae Smith. As for the tight ends, Jack Stoll was working ahead of Albert Okwuegbunam on Saturday. Stoll had 6 routes compared to 1 for Okwuegbunam. There is a shot that Okwuegbunam does pop on this team because he's a fun player. He got some athleticism, but I think it'll likely just stabilize and boost Devontae Smith more than anything. If you look back at that 5-game stretch last year, Smith averaged 5 receptions for 84 yards. His full season total, including those games, was 70.4 yards per game. This year is at 59.2, so it's not super far off. They're on bye this week, but I do want to buy into Devontae Smith once the Eagles are back because we've seen what he can do on elevated usage, and we know that he probably will get that if Goddard can't go. So kind of just log in the back of your brain to bump up Devontae Smith once the Eagles are back off their bye week. Daniel Jones left week 9 with a knee injury that seems likely to end his season, which stinks quite a bit. Tough way to go out here. Tommy DeVito filled in again, and he was pretty brutal again. Averaged negative 0.40 passing net expected points per dropback. They did let him throw deep a bit more here, but I don't think that'll stick. I would bet they go to Matt Barkley on the practice squad. He knows Brian Daboll's terminology from when they were in Buffalo. So I think it'd help to have Barkley as opposed to DeVito, but it's still pretty bad. We were not using pass catchers here before, so we're definitely not now. The one question is how much we downgrade Saquon Barkley. He's going to play a ton because he's a competitor. He's a really tough guy, but he's also entering free agency on a team that's 2-7. And they may want to run him ragged as they did in that first game where DeVito played, but I would, if I were him, I'd push back on that personally. I don't know if I want to ruin myself right before free agency. He was 8,600 this past week, downgrading quarterback, downgraded this entire team. The Giants implied total in week 10 is 11.8 or 11.75 against Dallas. We're not getting a lot of that. So I need Saquon's salary to come down quite a bit. At most, I could pay 78 for a guy like that on this team. Love the usage, love the player, just hate the offense. And the offense matters quite a bit for daily fantasy football. Christian Watson got banged up on Sunday for the Packers and could not return. It was announced as chest and back injuries, but he was also checked for a concussion. And the bigger story of this game is Aaron Jones. We'll talk about him later on, but Dontavian Wicks actually ran more routes than Jaden Reed, which was weird and way different than last week. Reed's role is actually pretty good. I would think that Reed's role would go back up if Watson can't go, but it does make the pass catching situation there pretty muddy. I don't think anybody here is safe for that Watson, no high floors here, and they're not exactly the highest upside offense either. So Luke Musgrave, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed all get boosts. It's not sure if it'll be enough to use them in DFS. Next week, the Packers taking on Pittsburgh, so not the best matchup for them either. Josh Downs left Sunday's game for the Colts with a knee injury and did not return. He was banged up coming in, didn't know if he'd play there, so that's not a great sign. Michael Pittman led the team with 8 targets. Jonathan Taylor had 5, and nobody else had more than 3. I like Alec Pierce as a player. I like his downfield ability. He's pretty good in college, but they just don't really give him the ball very much, and that matters. So I would say this boosts Michael Pittman, if Downs misses time. He'll get a ton of looks as he does already. As long as a game environment is not too hideous, and typically Indy tends to play in pretty fun games, I'd have to think Pittman will be worth a look in the 7,000 range. We'll talk about Taylor later on. They're playing in international games, so not in the main slate next week, but bump up Michael Pittman with Josh Downs potentially missing time. Treylon Burks got banged up again Thursday and missed the end of that game. It happened late, but DeAndre Hopkins finished with 11 targets. 4 of those targets were deep, and that's because Will Levis is just chucking it. His ADOT is 10.8 through 2 games. Very big number. His completion percentage over expected and EPA per dropback are both basically in line with Ryan Tannehill, tiny bit better than Tannehill, but in line with him. In the 3 games that Burks missed earlier on this year, Hopkins' target share is 27.5%. Chikakonkwo was at 20% as well. They're still going to be run heavy. Their early down first half pass rate is actually almost exactly the same as it was with Tannehill. So it's a very similar offense to what it was with him. But trimming the target tree down is not a bad thing. And Levis can give some upside. They get Tampa Bay next week. It's not the worst game. I think we'll see a pretty high pass rate in this game because both rush defenses are pretty good. So I would say Hopkins, if we can get him in the low 7,000 range, that'd be pretty sick. I'm willing to pay 75 for him, but I think he might be lower than that. He is 71. I like that. I think that's a very good spot to have Hopkins in. And I would not be surprised if I'm in on Hopkins next week, taking on Tampa Bay. we're getting deep targets. We're getting a lot of targets without Burke. So I think that's pretty beneficial for DeAndre Hopkins. 71, good number for him. Okonkwo, I'd probably want to be around like 40, 48 or so at tight end. And he's 48 on the button. So I wouldn't be shocked if I wind up using some Titans next week against the Bucks. Again, should be a game where both rush defenses are pretty good. Neither pass defense is very good. That can be a good combo for some shootouts, as we saw in that Houston-Tampa Bay game this past week. So arrows up on DeAndre Hopkins and Chig Okonkwo as well. Let's talk now about some role updates that we saw from this week, and few are bigger than Aaron Jones. He finally saw his usage spike for the Packers, and he had 20 carries and 6 targets for 99 yards. He also had 6 out of 9 red zone chances for the team. And this is the role we've been waiting for Jones for a very long time. And the pass catching should be there with Christian Watson now banged up once again. So I'm very into this role for Aaron Jones, getting the goal line work or getting the red zone work, getting the pass catching work. He will still lose out on to Dylan, and Dylan will be very frustrating for us because he will still get that work. But I think with how effective Jones has been, how much this offense needs him, we're probably going to see a lot of him going forward. Now, next week, Green Bay is going to Pittsburgh. A very tough matchup for them. 3-point dogs. Their implied total 17.25. But with Aaron Jones having the role he has, I think that his salary needs to be probably around $7,600, even factoring in how tough that matchup is. And next week on FanDuel, Aaron Jones' salary is 68. That's a bargain. I think that's a great number to get Aaron Jones at. If he's going to give us that kind of role, we got to take advantage. So Aaron Jones, $6,800, the first guy for next week who really stands out as being a guy we'll want to turn to when looking to save salary on FanDuel. Taysom Hill kept up his sick role once again, and it actually ate a bit into Alvin Kamara. Now, I'm not saying this is like a criticism because this is working out. This Taysom Hill role for the Saints is actually pretty good. We'll talk about that in a second here. But the numbers here in this game, Hill had 11 carries and 5 targets, and that was actually more if we made Hill a running back, which he kind of is, I guess. That would be more adjusted opportunities than Kamara had at 19. Again, adjusted opportunities is carries plus 2x targets. Hill also had 8 red zone chances. That was his second consecutive week where he was super involved in the red zone. And their red zone offense has been very good. Their success rate inside the red zone is up 20 percentage points the past 2 weeks versus where it was before then when they were not using Hill as much there. So, like from a team perspective, they absolutely should keep doing this. And that does hurt Kamara, who also lost some work to Jamal Williams this week. When I think more about it, I probably should have been more skeptical of Kamara at $9,200. I got infatuated by the targets and stuff like that, so I got a bit too high on him this past week. He has some issues, and those issues showed up on Sunday. I don't think it's a huge downgrade, but it is a downgrade for sure for Kamara. I was probably just a bit too high on him. I think he's more of like an $8,500 back, with all things considered. They're facing Minnesota next week. I think if you were to give me to 85, 83, I'd be pretty enticed. He's 88. Yeah, it's not out at that number, but I'm not itchy to use him either, just because I think Taysom Hill's here to stay. Deservedly so. Do want to check quickly to see what Taysom Hill's salary is at tight end for next week. He is 7,000. That's fair, honestly, given the way he's being used right now is basically a running back. He scored 14.8 FanDuel points, 21.96, and 18.62. We're going to have to consider Taysom Hill at 7,000. And again, I think the Saints should keep doing this. So good on them. Honestly, I've come around in Taysom Hill. I think he's actually kind of fun as a football player, valuable as a football player. So I get it. And I'm okay with that for sure. Jonathan Taylor was basically back to a full workload for the Colts. 18 carries and 5 targets. The 5 targets, honestly, a pretty nice relief for JT. Snap rate was 75%. I was willing to pay $8,000 for JT this past week. And I think this game should make us feel more secure in doing so. JT's in the international game next week, so not in the main slate, but I would bump him up once again once we see him on the main slate, because I think that he's kind of back to being what he was in an offense that plays in a lot of high-scoring games. Aiden O'Connell was okay in his first full start as the Raiders' full-time guy. Obviously, the team as a whole played very well. O'Connell averaged 0.38 passing net expected points per dropback. His completion percentage over expectation was negative, so that could have been a bit fluky, the efficiency. And the team was very run-heavy, even in the first half. Their early down first half pass rate was 36%, but O'Connell got the ball out quickly this time. He got the ball out efficiently. Devontae Adams, 29% target share in this game. Jacoby Myers, 21%, but they just didn't throw a whole lot, so we didn't really notice that. And that'll likely be the case going forward with the new coaching staff in place. It does help Josh Jacobs because, if they're going to run the football commit like this, that's a good thing. But I can get to Adams and Myers if they are in a spot where they'll have to throw, but won't be in a huge hole. And they get the Jets on Sunday next week. Probably going to be a pretty run-heavy script for them once again. But overall, it was an okay performance from Aiden O'Connell. We should expect them to be a bit more run-heavy in the future. Deontay Johnson had 9 more targets for the Steelers on Thursday. His target share since coming back is up to 32%, and he has more than 2 deep targets per game in that span. I'm not really a Johnson guy in general, but the deep target's nice because the reason I don't like him typically is because of lack of yardage upside. But if he's going to get deep targets, he'll have yardage juice for sure. Now they're facing the Packers next week. Total in that game is very low, but I mean, that's kind of just the nature we're living with right now in the NFL. So I would say Deontay Johnson, if you told me, if I liked Hopkins, I thought it's 75 for him and he's at 71, I would probably put Johnson around like 7,000 and his salary 7,000 on the button. So I think that's not a bad spot to look for next week. So Deontay Johnson, well worth that 7,000 salary against the Packers. If you want a mini stack with Aaron Jones, I don't mind that all that much. Jerome Ford was healthier this week, and with Deshaun Watson being back, Ford had a really good role, 63% snap rate, 20 carries, 7 targets. He wasn't effective on those looks, and he did still lose some red zone work to Kareem Hunt, so it wasn't perfect, but it was something, at least. They're facing Baltimore on the road this week, so really tough matchup for this Cleveland offense, and I think they're going to get tested in that game. So Forward, I thought was pretty oversalaried at 7,000 this past week. I think he's worth that now with the role he had, but I'm guessing he'll probably be up to around 75. I think he should be 7,000, but he'll probably be 75. He's 64. Just kidding. Wow, I was way off. Okay, so $6,400 for Jerome Ford. That's not bad. And despite the matchup, that might be a number we need to think pretty long and hard about. That could be a trap, going into the guy just because he's undersalaried against Baltimore. But I do like the role, and the offense is better now than it was, at least. So Jerome Ford, $6,400. We have Alexander Madison's potential value play. Aaron Jones, pretty undersalaried. I think running back next week is pretty okay, at least based on the initial look with what we're seeing for next week. I've talked about him a couple of times, but Rachaad White's role continues to be very good for the Buccaneers. 81% snap rate on Sunday. He handled 9 out of 16 red zone chances, and the yardage for White has been up recently. He's not going to be the most explosive guy, but I think we should keep on bumping him up. They get Tennessee, so pretty tough rushing matchup for Rachaad White, but he does get a lot of work in the passing game. Again, I think that he was $6,900, probably bumping him up a bit more. Given the matchup, I'd probably keep him at 7,000 for next week. And he's 7,000 on the button. So, yeah, I think that's appropriate for Rachaad White. The efficiency has been better. This team has been good still on offense. So, I do think Rachaad White is at least not out of consideration 7,000. I prefer the other guys we talked about before. Specifically Aaron Jones. I might like Jerome Ford more too, just because lower salary if they're both going to be in a tough matchup. Probably go with the lower salary guy, but not bad. And I'm okay with Rachaad White where things are going right now. Dalton Kincaid had another big game on Sunday night. He had 11 targets for 81 yards. The 11 targets were the most on the Bills. In 2 games without Dawson Knox, Kincaid has a 25% target share. Stephon Diggs at 27%. Gabe Davis 20%. Kincaid still has 0 deep targets so far this year, which is kind of his one blemish, but volume can make up for that. We want pieces of this offense, and Kincaid does give that to us at a pretty low salary. They're playing against the Broncos on Monday night, and Kincaid's single game salary last night was very low. If it's low once again, I'd go pretty hard there. If it winds up being pretty even between him and Gabe Davis, maybe go to Davis for the bounce back because I think that we'll see him get back on track here. He's volatile, but he can explode too. So I think that the upside for Davis is better. So I would judge that based on where their salaries are relative to each other for next week. Jahan Dotson had 8 targets with no Curtis Samuel on Sunday. That doesn't mean a ton because it was just an 18% share because the Commanders throw so much, but they throw a lot. So 18% matters more here than it does elsewhere. But Dotson in that game had 3 deep targets. Before that point, he had not had multiple deep targets in a game yet all year. One of those did result in a touchdown. So I'm still not super high on Dotson, and I will lower him once Samuel is back, but I'm pushing him up each week now, given what he's shown us. They're facing Seattle next week. That total is 44.5, which is not bad for the main slate. So I would not be shocked for checking out Jahan Dotson next week in Seattle. His salary is 62. That's about where I would have put it. So on board with Jahan Dotson next week. Finally, Jake Ferguson showed some upside on Sunday. He turned his 10 targets into 91 yards. Previous high for him was 48, so doubled his previous total. I had been resistant to him because I thought he lacked juice, and that may have been wrong. It's also worth noting that Jalen Tolbert ate into Michael Gallup's role, especially in the second half. 19 second half routes for Tolbert compared to 12 for Gallup. He turned that into 5 targets for 45 yards and a touchdown. I'd keep an eye on that. Tolbert, pretty high draft equity, hasn't done a lot with that in the year and a half since then, but there is some upside here if he can start getting playing time, especially compared to what Gallup has done. I think if they're going to make that switch and put Tolbert above Gallup, that's not that bad. So worth monitoring for right now with Tolbert. But I think that Ferguson is probably honestly the number 2 stacking candidate with Dak right now behind CeeDee Lamb, who continues to have very good usage. So like Lamb a lot, and would probably put Ferguson number 2 when you consider positions and stuff like that with your stacks. Let's take a look now at the Week 10 salaries over on FanDuel, do our salary scroll for this week, and kind of shout out salaries that stand out to me over on FanDuel for next week. And again, there's no Mahomes, no Hurts, no Tua next week in the main slate, no Josh Allen because he's on Monday night, no Tyson Bagent next week. Pretty big loss with there. So quarterback's going to be kind of weird. And the first thing that stands out to me is that Lamar Jackson's 83. I know he has these bad games. I know Cleveland's defense is very, very tough, but like, it should be close. And if it's a close game, we know what Lamar can do. First game against Cleveland, Lamar went for 28.1 FanDuel points, a couple of rushing touchdowns there to really buoy his scoring. But like, I think that salary is a little bit low, and I kind of want to consider him at that number despite the matchup. So I'll probably take a look at the Cleveland defense on Thursday to see if we can use Jackson against him. Joe Burrow 82 makes sense. Like that game a lot, as discussed earlier on. The 2 like pocket quarterbacks on this slate, I guess, I don't know if you want to classify Stroud that way. I probably would because he doesn't run a whole lot, but the 2 who are like standouts as far as like good games are Jared Goff and CJ Stroud. Goff is 8,000, Stroud 77. I'd probably lean Goff there just because he's playing indoors against a defense I respect a bit less than the Chargers, whereas Stroud is facing the Bengals. They haven't been great, obviously, but they can do some stuff for sure. So leaning towards Goff there over CJ Stroud. Also, Kyler Murray might be back next week. I think he probably will be, honestly. He's 75. I don't want to get there right away because that might be a bit ambitious, but worth noting that the Cardinals offense may be a bit more fun if Kyler does indeed wind up playing. Trevor Lawrence's salary is 71, taking on San Francisco again, so a very tough matchup, but low salary for a guy who has been running a bit more recently, had the bye week to get that knee healthy as well. Good game, I think. Total in that game is 44.5 right now. You see where I've got that. I haven't pulled in win yet, so this is without win, which does matter quite a bit. 46 before win, so it's actually going to probably want to be 44.5. So, not a great game by any means, but not a bad one either. Looking for things below 7,000, Geno Smith at 69. I know it's been awful. I know I've talked about Geno a couple of times and it's never worked out, but like, it's a good game taking on the Commanders. Defense has traded away some key guys. I've got that total pretty high. Or sorry, the spread pretty high in that game. So I don't expect a lot of like back and forth there. But if you're looking for a lower salary guy, Geno's in a good matchup at 69. Might be able to talk myself into that one. Don't see anything else down here. So I think to me, the highlights are kind of, Lamar, if you can justify that matchup at 83, Joe Burrow 82, and then maybe get into one of Goff or Stroud in the low 8,000, high 7,000 range. Running back, we get Christian McCaffrey back this week at $10,500. Facing the Jags, very good rush defense so far, but who cares? It's Christian McCaffrey. and Travis Etienne 84 as well. People have been able to run on the Chargers or on the 49ers a little bit. So I think that Etienne is at least worth consideration there at 84, despite how tough the matchup is. We get David Montgomery back this week, and Jahmyr Gibbs' salary is 82. I don't think I'll be paying that just because I would expect Montgomery to get a lot of early down work once again. So probably not getting to Gibbs, but I want to see where Montgomery settles in the salary scroll later on. Tony Pollard got jacked up because of the matchup. He's 78 again. I think that makes it a lot easier to not be as high on him. Now, I'm guessing this week he'll score 3 touchdowns because he has not scored since week 1. So that's probably how it'll go. I'll probably wind up here because I know myself. At least it's a higher salary than it was before. So it makes it easier to justify if I do wind up slipping elsewhere. Joe Mixon, 77, taking on Houston. Pretty decent rush defense. Mixon's looked better recently. I'm not out on that, but also not leaping there. Montgomery, $7,500 taking on the Chargers. That might be low enough where I consider him just because that game's pretty good. So David Montgomery at 75, potentially a guy we're talking about later on. Then we get down to the guys we highlighted before. Aaron Jones, 68. Oh, wow. We got Bijan Robinson down to $6,600. Yikes. I get it. Like, I understand why it's there because he hasn't really done a whole lot, but they're facing the Cardinals on the road. This could be like a Pollard situation where it's like I keep talking myself into the workload, and the workload is flawed too for both those guys. But like, I don't know, it just seems low. Bijan this past week, 61% snap rate, 11 carries, 4 targets, lost a fumble. He had 0 red zone chances out of 6 for the team. So I don't know. I'm probably going to do that because I just like the talent so much. It's frustrating, but like when the salary's that low, it's kind of accounting for his flaws. And we know that he can go nuts because he's just such a talented player. So I'm probably going to wind up on Bijan at 66 as well. So Aaron Jones, 68, Bijan, 66, couple of value running backs we could turn to. Jerome Ford, 64, same thing, despite the matchup. Alexander Madison, 62. So like, if you want to get to McCaffrey at 10-5, maybe you plug in a couple of these value plays in Madison, Ford, Robinson, Aaron Jones, and use the savings to get to Christian McCaffrey at $10,500. Devin Singletary's salary is 57. He was awful this week. He's awful every week. He's Devin single digits for a reason, but like he played a lot of snaps for the Texans in that game. Facing Cincinnati, I would like to stay away from at 57, but you know, he's at least down there if you want another option. I think the other guys in the 6,000 range going to grade out a lot better than him. Don't see anything else here in the 5,000 range. So let's skip on over to wide receiver. But again, the highlights there, Aaron Jones, Bijan Robinson, kind of Jerome Ford, Alexander Madison. At wide receiver, the premier games in the slate are the Chargers and the Lions, and then the Texans and the Bengals. And you see a lot of the receivers in those two games up here. Jamar Chase, 93, Keenan Allen, 9,000, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, $8,600. I think they're all appropriately salaried, but no key values there standing out as of right now. Mike Evans gets the Titans. His salary is $7,600. I've been on him quite a bit recently. Wouldn't be shocked from there again, just because I think, again, we'll see a lot of passing attempts in that game. Scrolling down further, mentioned before, DeAndre Hopkins, 71, still on board with that number. I think it's a pretty good salary to get him at. T. Higgins, 7,000. Interesting. Okay. Higgins had a big game on Sunday night. I would bet that inflates his roster rate, but didn't score and has not scored since week 2, I believe that is. Definitely can, though. And he's definitely got yardage upside if he doesn't score anyway. So T. Higgins, 7,000. I would like him more than Hopkins, considering the two game environments, but both those guys pretty fun in the low 7,000 range. Mentioned before, Nico Collins, 69. Don't hate that either. Calvin Ridley's down to $6,700 coming off the Jaguars bye. Pretty decent usage for him before their bye week. 10 targets, 83 yards in that game against Pittsburgh. I'd bet him on Ridley because I'll probably stack that game. So don't mind Ridley. Christian Kirk, same salary, 67. So dig into the matchups, I would bet, to kind of see which flavor of receiver you want to use against that 49ers defense. Going down here lower again, Tank Dell, 64. Think that makes a lot of sense. No objections to that one. Zay Flowers, 6,000. I'll probably wind up there again just because I know myself. Do you want to see what Quentin Johnston's role looks like? Josh Palmer on IR. Johnston playing tonight. His salary is 59, so I doubt he's like a good value. I think FanDuel was kind of ahead of this one. They knew, okay, Johnson might get bumped up, so they kind of bumped up the salary preemptively. Doubt is a huge value, but do want to keep a close eye on what he does in tonight's game. Getting down into the mid to low 5,000 range, not seeing a whole lot that really grabs my attention down here, at least as of right now. So probably not going to be looking too much in the value bin at receiver, but really do like some of the low 7,000, high 6,000 range wide receivers. Specifically, I like Tank Dell 64, but then Calvin Ridley 67 or Christian Kirk 67, Nico Collins 69, T. Higgins 7,000, and DeAndre Hopkins at $7,100. Over to tight end, Mark Andrews 73 against Cleveland. You know, I'm not opposed to that. I think he had a good game against them earlier on this year. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 80 yards, and 2 tuds in that game. He can go off like that pretty much whenever they want him to. So Andrews 73, even though it's a tough matchup. Not opposed to that. Mentioned before, Taysom Hill 7,000. TJ Hawkinson against New Orleans $6,600. Like, that's going to be pretty hard to turn down, I would guess, just because of the target share he is getting. Prefer Hawkinson over Sam Laporta. Love Laporta. Adore him. Good game, too. But he's 65, whereas Hawkinson's 66. Hawkinson's like the guy in his offense if Jefferson isn't back, whereas Laporta is like the number 2 behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Hawkinson over Laporta, but both those guys pretty fun. And overall, the 6,000 range, upper range of tight end, pretty good, despite no Kelsey. Andrews, Taysom Hill, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, all those guys well worth their salaries to me. I typically like Evan Engram. I don't like that matchup against San Francisco because, like, guys who operate in the middle of the field just kind of get absorbed by Fred Warner. So probably not getting there with Engram, but the usage is really good. So maybe I should think more about that, but just really don't like the matchup. Jonnu Smith has a higher salary than Kyle Pitts. Oh boy. And it's right. Like, this is not a criticism. It's correct. Like, he should be higher salaried than Kyle Pitts at this point. Pitts 5 for 56 is not bad for a tight end. So I think among the lower salary guys I've seen so far, Pitts would be number 1, but like, that makes me so sad to see him below Jonnu Smith. Chika Okonkwo, $4,800. I think that's another potential value tight end we could turn to, but that's probably going to wind up being it. So I would say the key guy who grabbed my attention most overall in the salary scroll was Aaron Jones at 68. Probably a guy we'll talk a lot about this week, but just in general, the 6,000 range at running back is pretty good. 7,000 range at receiver is pretty good. So that might be where I want to settle once we get into the Week 10 preview. Speaking of that, that'll be live on the FanDuel YouTube page, 10 a.m. Eastern on Thursday. Also up on FanDuel TV Plus and the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after the show gets done with myself and Brandon Gadula. So go subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And again, subscribe to FanDuel TV Plus or subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page as well. If you got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Saunas. You can also find me on Threads at Jim.Saunas or follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Enjoy the Monday Night Football game. We'll talk to you once again Thursday to give you a full preview of Week number 10. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.